Sego, Yohaji Nayangats, Kanyangahage, Haudenosaunee, Six Nations of the Grand River. My English name is Ava Hill. Yohaji is my traditional name. And I am the, as was announced, I'm the former elected chief and an Indigenous leader in my community. I was the chief for 6 years. And when I looked at this question, talking about some of the issues on equity and racial justice, I think it affects pretty much every facet of the life of Indigenous people in this country. And I want to begin with a little bit of talking about our history. You know, Charles mentioned the theft of our land, colonization, and one of the darkest areas that we have had in our history is the residential school era, where our children were taken from their families forcibly in many cases and put in residential schools for over 150 years. This caused the theft, the loss of our language, the loss of our culture, the loss of practicing our ceremonies and our traditions. And the effects of that have been intergenerational. As a leader in our community, I see that still affecting with a lot of the social struggles that we are facing with our children and our youth. So since I'm no longer the chief, since I've retired, I have focused on working with the youth and getting them on the right path and giving them the hope and inspiration that they need to succeed and finally seek justice for the First Peoples of this land. And some of the issues that we've talked about, and I just want to be more specific about some of the areas because a lot of it has reached the media, a lot of it has reached national. And I just want to say that prior to when I was a young girl, which was quite a while ago, there was a residential school that was open in my community in the city. It's within the confines of the city of Brantford, and we've just refurbished it, and it's going to be open so people can come and tour there and learn and hear about what happened to those young people. But there are many issues that have affected our people, healthcare being one of them. Some of you may remember, you know, like as I was going to say, from when I was younger to now, things have really gotten better as to getting our stories out there and how our people have been treated. And healthcare was one of them. There's a couple of them that I just want to mention. One is Jordan. There was a young boy named Jordan River Anderson, who was only 5 years old and from Manitoba, who suffered from a rare muscular disorder that required years of medical treatment. And when his family took him to the hospital in Winnipeg, the federal and the provincial government sat there and argued about who should be responsible for paying for his health care. And they never came to an agreement, and then Jordan passed away. You know, there was an uproar across the country, and now we have a fund that is called Jordan's Principle, which is there to help, you know, with our young people who are having, medical issues. Some of you may remember the story of Joyce Etchiquan from Quebec, who videotaped herself screaming in pain while healthcare workers abused her and made derogatory comments about her, assuming her to be a drug addict who was experiencing withdrawal symptoms. And that's just some of the stuff that has happened, you know, from the stereotyping. The other, and I know I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to hurry. Justice system. The justice system, the incarceration rates of men and Indigenous men and women in the jails and prisons across this country. And I want to acknowledge Senator Pate, who's been doing a lot of work on this. And, is part of going back to the residential school because of the intergenerational trauma. When people came out of those schools, they did not know how to parent. They did not know how to love. We lost our identity. They lost their language. They lost their culture. And a lot of them found solace in drug abuse and alcohol abuse. And as I said, it's continued to go on to affect the intergenerational people, the kids that are growing up now. And of course, then a lot of them end up taking the wrong path and end up being incarcerated. Part of that as well is, you know, missing and murdered Indigenous women. There's the biggest part, the largest percentage of people who are involved in the missing and murdered are the Indigenous women. You know, we just, and now there's violence against Indigenous women, and some of it is some of it was done by police officers. When I first became chief, I had a guy come into my office, and he worked for CSIS and told me that he thought some of the police officers were taking Indigenous women and having sex with them so that they wouldn't charge them with whatever offenses they had committed. So there was that part of that racism about the women. And then you will all remember the Colton Boushie case, a young man who was trespassing on a farm in Saskatchewan. The guy came out and shot and killed him and was found not guilty. The same, that was in 2016. And in 2 years later, the same thing happened in my community. And it was very close to my heart because a young man was killed again, and he was the father of my two nieces. And he was, you know, wrongly trying to steal a car, and the guy again came out and shot and killed him, and he was acquitted. And I sat through that trial, and I seen the racism that exists in the justice system, not only among the police officers, but the people in the juries, everything, the crowns. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be found, and a lot of work that still needs to be done in justice. Child welfare, you'll all remember, we just had a case not too long ago, Canadian human rights case on the inequity of funding for child welfare, to look after our kids, to keep our kids in our own homes and so that they can grow up safely. That is still ongoing. And I just want to express thanks to Cindy Blackstock from the First Nations Caring Society, who has been relentless in ensuring that there is equitable funding for kids. We also have housing. We have people living in houses that, particularly in the northern communities, that are remote, and water. The boil water advisories. I mean, we see it everywhere. In policing, there's an equitable funding in policing. My community is the largest populated community in the country with 28,000 people. And we had a police force of only about 30 people, 30 police officers. And so I've been involved in that and trying to secure more resources for our policing. And when we compare it with the OPP, it's not the same. It's inequitable. It's the same thing. And in sports, I'm involved in sports. I'm on a Commonwealth Sport Canada, and I just worked on a declaration on reconciliation and partnership with Indigenous peoples. I went to Singapore in November and presented it to their annual assembly, and that declaration was acclaimed by the 74 countries that were there. And what it calls for is giving those Indigenous athletes the opportunity, particularly if they're high performance athletes, the opportunity to have that, the ability to compete and to perform in international sporting events. At the same time, educating people around the world about our history and educating them, as well as if there's, and we know this from British Columbia, if there's going to be a international sporting event in the area, like there was in Vancouver a few years ago, that the First Nations, and it's our traditional territory, the First Nations should be the ones that are going to be involved in that from the beginning to the end. So there are improvements being made, and there are a number of stuff, and I'll pass it on just because we have so many panelists and can talk more about what can be done when we do our other thing. But just the last thing I wanted to say was, you know, whenever I spoke as the chief, I always said that racism is alive and well in this country. I think most of us in this room know that. And I see it, and I always say, we see it a lot in those communities and little towns that are surrounding all of the 613 First Nations communities, reserves. Because our land was stolen, we were put on reservations, we were put on reserves. And all those little towns are on there. We feel it, we grew up we have that lived experience of growing up in racism, and we still experience, even when we go shopping, when we go to sports, when our kids go to school. So there's still a lot of issues out there, and I look forward to congratulate the CNERJ on their launch, and look forward to the work that you're going to do. And I do have some pointers on some of the work that you can do to reach people across the country, particularly the Indigenous people. Yawa.